G'day, Frank here. Muslim apologists like E.F. Dawa claim that the Bible has been corrupted, but that the Quran contains the very words dictated to Muhammad by God. However, there are some red flags in the book, which must alert any thinking person to the fact that at least some of the Quran is just fable. Miracles don't happen every day, and belief in any miracle is a question of faith. But some stories are so outlandish that even faith cannot stretch that far. This is the case with some stories in the Quran. They cannot possibly be true and act as red flags warning you about the nature of the book.
Exhibits 1 and 2 relate to King Solomon, who appears in both the Bible and the Quran. He was the son of David, ruling Israel when it was at the zenith of its power. The books of 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles describe his life in some detail, and he is presented as being very wise and fabulously wealthy. There may be some exaggeration, but there is nothing outlandish in these accounts. This is in stark contrast to the Quran. The story of the Queen of Sheba appears in Surah 27 and also in the Bible. In the Quran, Solomon has jinns and birds in his army. One of the latter, the hoopie bird, had flown down to Sheba, reconnoitred the kingdom, and brought back a report on the Queen's wealth and religion. Solomon sent the bird back with a threatening ultimatum, and the Queen came and did submission. In the Bible account, she came of her own free will to hear Solomon's wisdom, but this is just a detail. The main point is that the Quran account has talking birds and jinns, like in Aladdin's lamp. It turns the Solomon story into a fable, a red flag. Solomon's death is described in Surah 34. He had power over the jinns, forcing them to do construction work, lifting heavy blocks, etc. The story is somewhat garbled, but when he died, he remained leaning on his stick for an unspecified period, which is generally thought to be about a year. The jinns did not realise he was dead and kept working until a worm chewed the stick and the corpse keeled over. This was apparently a great trick to play on the jinns. Strangely, in that period, no one noticed that he never came in for dinner or to wash, nor did he conduct any government business. This story is a fable. It serves as a red flag. Exhibit 3 is the curious character of Dhul Qarnayn, who appears in Surah 18. Nobody knows who this man was or when he lived, although some suggest he's based on a fictionalised version of Alexander the Great. He travelled west to where he found the sun sets in a muddy pond, but his greatest achievement was to build a barrier between two steep mountainsides to block the advance of Gog and Magog. He made this barrier with blocks of iron and poured molten lead over the top. This is odd, as lead is much softer than iron, and you could cut steps into lead with a knife. But whatever the material, it would take a colossal amount to build a wall across a valley, and pouring molten metal over from a height would require a lot of special equipment. Gog and Magog are apparently still trapped behind the barrier, although no one knows where it is. Yet, whatever the technical details, if a wall can be built, it can be climbed over, unless you post soldiers on top with pointy things to poke anyone who tries to scale it. If there ever was a wall, the story has been turned into a myth, another red flag. Surah 18 also includes the account of the companions of the cave, which is about some youths who entered a cave and came out some 300 years later. It seems to be based on a Christian legend known as the 7 Sleepers of Ephesus. The story goes that these 7 youths hid in a cave to escape from persecution, but the Romans blocked the cave mouth. They fell asleep and miraculously emerged 300 years later to find that the persecution had ceased and the Roman Empire had become Christian. The Quran's version of the story skips the Christian aspects and focuses on questions about the number of sleepers and the length of their hibernation. Surah 18 avoids giving a definitive answer to either question. The number of sleepers, of course, depends on whether you count the dog, which is a red flag. The Quran says very little about Jesus, but surprisingly it tells the nativity story twice. and both Surah 3 and Surah 19 have bits which are like Luke's Gospel. But there are major differences. Joseph is absent, and in Surah 19, Mary gave birth alone in the wilderness. Then, when she returned to her people, they were shocked to see an unmarried mother. But the infant Jesus in her arms defended her by proclaiming himself to be a prophet. In fact, 20% of all the words attributed to Jesus in the Quran are in this speech. Another red flag. Then there is the case of the elephant. Surah 105 refers to a treacherous plan by the companions of the elephant, which was defeated by birds dropping stones on them. The passage is not clear when, where or why this happened, but it is traditionally believed that King Abraha of Yemen led an attack against Mecca with elephants, intending to destroy the Kaaba. Even though it was filled with idols back then, Allah defended it by sending birds to bomb the attackers. King Abraha was so cut to pieces by the stones, only a stump of a man was left. None of these details are mentioned in the Quran, so perhaps I'm unjustified in saying this is a red flag. But what does Surah 105 mean without the embellished explanation?
So that makes 6 red flags, which is a suitable place to stop. In Lewis Carroll's Alice Through the Looking Glass, when Alice told the Queen she found impossible things hard to believe, the Queen responded, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Whatever you want to think about the source of the Quran, one has to recognise that it contains some myths. But now, over to you. How will you respond to these 6 impossible things? Will you practice more and try harder? Or will you recognise the red flags and be very cautious about the rest of the book?